We have our cameras on, right? Sorry.
I don't think so. I don't believe we're doing a bit of.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the JJP. I had to look down to see what committee I was in. The JJPOC Juvenile Justice Policy and Oversight Committee to order. I want to welcome everybody to all the regular faces and the new faces that I see in the committee. And thank you for coming. Today's going to be a continuation of Education Day. I started out with education at 9 o'clock, probably a lot earlier than that, and it's going to be all day. That's great. I think that's wonderful. So with that, I'll ask my co-chair.
Thank you, Rep. Walker, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to listen to the presentations that we have today, and we have a pretty packed agenda, so I won't take up too much of everyone's time. But I will turn it over to Erica.
Good afternoon, everybody. Erica Nowakowski with the Tau Youth Justice Institute at the University of New Haven. A couple of things we need to call the approval of the minutes for last month.
So moved.
May I have a motion to, if there's no changes, may I have a motion to accept the minutes from the previous meeting? The meeting of, what date was that? The January 19th?
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Any corrections?
One correction.
Yes,
Madam
ma'am.
On the final page of the minutes under the 2024 recommendations vote, the incarceration work group, the final vote says, the vote for the education work group, it's just a Scrivener's error. It should be incarceration. So if we could just correct that.
Duly noted. Duly noted. Okay, with that correction, may I have a motion to accept the minutes again, please?
So second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposition? Great. We can start our meeting.
Thank you so much. So for this afternoon, we actually have, as you mentioned, Rep. Walker, two presentations coming to you regarding educational services for our children here in Connecticut. One of the particular presentations is focused on a lot of work that has occurred through this committee for many, many years now, and that is regarding the educational services of the oversight of educational services for children in juvenile justice facility. That will be our second presentation by Department of Children's and Family. We will start our first presentation with the State Department of Education, providing an update and some key information. And I will give the floor to our commissioner, Charlene Russell Tucker.
Thank you very much, Erica, and to our chair and those of you in the room. I am so pleased to be here with all of you today. I do watch this regularly, your meetings, and sometimes I want to respond to the questions that are being asked. So here I am in person, but really appreciate it and really appreciate the work that this body is doing and the work that we're doing together for students in Connecticut. I'm here with a team. I won't take a lot of time as they're speaking. They'll introduce themselves. But the work around attendance, the work around school discipline that I know you've worked on here in this body is one of great importance to us, one that has spanned many, many years of doing this work, something that I've personally done for many years as well. And so wanted to provide some updates to you on both fronts and then also to take your questions. I will also introduce a part of our team here is a superintendent from East Hartford Public Schools.
Excuse me. Is that from outside the room or is that it's outside the room? I'm sorry. I heard voices behind you and I don't want to have people. All right, let's try it again. Go right ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you, Rep. Walker. So I wanted to introduce Mr. Tom Anderson, who is our superintendent from East Hartford Public Schools. It's always good to get a local perspective in the space as we talk about it. So we'll make time to make sure we hear about some of the work that's going on in East Hartford as well. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to the team members here, and I will certainly interject as necessary to provide some more context to the presentation that we're making to you today. So thank you all very much for having us here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Frassinelli, Division Director at SDE and School Health, Child Nutrition, and Family Services. Just a brief outline, if we can go to the next slide. We're going to talk, Ajit is going to talk about our accountability system results. Ajit is the Chief Performance Officer at SDE. We'll share some information about attendance and chronic absenteeism results and a number of initiatives that are happening at the department and across and around the state. We'll touch a little bit on school discipline data and actions to support the reduction in exclusionary discipline, as this group often likes to discuss. And then we'll talk a little bit about, in support of that work, the social, emotional, and behavioral supports that are happening across the state. So we will start with Ajit with the accountability results.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon again. Ajit Gopalakrishnan, Chief Performance Officer from the Department of Education. I'll give a brief overview of the accountability results and why it matters for this committee's discussion. Our accountability system is a holistic system that looks at multiple indicators of student engagement and student outcomes. So it's not all test scores. We look at lots of things beyond test scores. And when we look at our accountability system results for the year that ended the 22-23 year, we noticed that chronic absenteeism declined really for the first time since the pandemic. It's still very high, but we saw it was heading hopefully in the right direction. And this year's data seems to suggest we are heading in that direction. So that's good. We saw some slight improvements in math and science performance. We saw improvements in our students demonstrating readiness for post-secondary. We saw some improvements in some of our other indicators, like the 6-year graduation rate and participation in arts courses. We had some good news that some schools that were identified for state support, who were focus or turnaround schools, those schools exited their classification, which means that they demonstrated continuous improvement. That's good. We also identified 153 schools of distinction, and 38 of them were in our alliance districts, meaning that schools that are high performing or demonstrating high growth exist in districts across the state. It can be done, and it is being done, and we are proud to showcase those schools as our schools of distinction. At the same time, there are challenges. Our achievement still lags pre-pandemic levels. Growth actually slowed a little bit last year, and that was something we were concerned about. One metric I think that I want to spend a little bit of time with this group is the measure we have, something called On Track to High School Graduation. This looks at 9th graders and sees if they are earning requisite credits. Today it's 6 credits in their 9th grade year. And if they aren't, it's an early prediction of high school graduation and high school completion on time. There's a lot of research behind the On Track measure. And it's really, you know, I spoke about absenteeism before, and we'll talk about discipline later in this presentation. These are all signs of engagement. We don't want our students to get disengaged and disconnected ultimately from us or from the state system as a whole. So these are measures we look at while the student is in school so that we can ensure that students remain connected and continue to learn while they're with us. So we saw that On Track to High School Graduation remains low, and our 4-year graduation rate, which had been increasing for like 9 years straight, 9 or 10 years straight, declined for the first time. So that was kind of our, again, that indication that the pandemic has had effects on absenteeism, which has effects on credit accumulation and engagement. Attendance really does matter, is at the core of a lot of things we do. Post-secondary entrance also was lagging pre-pandemic levels. It's declined. Few of our students are pursuing post-secondary. Post-secondary doesn't mean 4-year college degrees only. It also means 2-year college. It also means certificate programs at colleges, credit-based pathways that allow students to earn occupational credentials at our post-secondary institutions, particularly our community college system, CT State. And we saw that decline, the post-secondary entrance, that's the first. And our physical fitness levels, when I talk of holistic, I mean, we do look at a lot of different aspects, and physical fitness is one of those measures that we look at, and that has declined, especially aerobic capacity, and that remains below pre-pandemic levels as well. So when you look at this On Track to Graduation measure, and the chart has 2 lines, one in orange and one in blue. The one in orange represents students who are identified as not having any of our high need markers, and the blue represents students who are identified as having one of our high need markers. And our high need markers are whether the student is an English learner, multilingual learner, a student with a disability, or from a low-income family. If they're any one of those, we sort of mark them as high needs for our accountability purposes and for tracking purposes. You'll notice there's a gap between those two lines. So yes, there's a gap in terms of being on track to high school in ninth grade, but you'll also notice that the blue line has a steeper decline in that pandemic year from 1920 to 2021. So we saw that not only was attendance a challenge for all our students, but especially students with high needs, that's being reflected in the on-track number. And on-track, again, is an early indication of high school graduation, so an early indication of disconnection if they drop out before they graduate. This is an early indication. And so what do we do about this, right? So we don't just produce the data and not do anything about it. We have a lot of different data supports that we provide, and there's lots more supports, but I'll speak particularly to the data supports. We don't have a statewide student information system, but we do have a statewide data sharing platform that we call EdSite Secure. EdSite, we have a public platform, but there's also a secure version of it. It gives districts and schools, authorized users at districts and schools, access to longitudinal, meaning over time, student level data. So when kids move from one district to another, all the historical information that we have about the child, the student follows that student to the new district. It's available to the new district the day after they register the student in our statewide system. So we have a near real-time data sharing that happens that they don't have to do anything except register the kid. They register the kid, they get all the years of data. So for example, if they register a ninth grader, if Bloomfield registers their ninth grader tomorrow and the student has been a public school student since pre-K, Bloomfield will receive all prior years of enrollment information. They will receive all the attendance information for that student. They will receive any disciplinary information. They will receive test scores. So all of that information flows over from all prior districts, not just one prior district, all prior districts the next day to Bloomfield in this instance. So that level of data exists so that the new district can use that information to bring supports to the student immediately without having to wait for paper records to come from the original district. So that's kind of the records transfer. The third bullet on there is our early indication tool. So we have a lot of data. We don't just sit on that data. We obviously publish it, but we also generate analytics that can help the district make decisions. So we have an early indication tool that looks at students grades 1 through 12 and gives an early indication of what level of support the student will need to meet particular milestones. So for students in grades 7 through 9, the indicator that we're looking for them to hit is be on track at the end of grade 9. So we are telling now, 7th graders who are in school now, like today, districts know which of those 7th graders, based on their historical data, are less likely to be on track at the end of grade 9. Not when they get into grade 9. We're telling them about 7th graders now. We're telling that about 8th graders, and we're also telling that about 9th graders. But I just want you to know that it's an early indication system that tells districts which of their students are going to need more support to be on track in grade 9. So that they don't disengage and disconnect down the road. And we use all kinds of data to make this decision, right? So we look at attendance, we look at behavior, we look at course performance, test scores, mobility, kids moving from one school to another or one district to another, prematurely. So if it's a pre-K-5 school and if the student leaves the school in 3rd grade, that's a premature change in school. So we use that information and we know from our data that those things are contributing to that likelihood of being on track at the end of 9th grade. And districts know at a kid level which of their students have met the 9th grade indicator and who hasn't. So that level of detail is provided to the district. And we do a lot of training around this too. And so I'll close my portion before I turn it back to John here to just sort of conclude on the different initiatives. I mentioned post-secondary. There are several things going on at the state level, not just the Department of Ed, really more in partnership with some of our partner institutions. There's an automatic admissions program that allows students in the top 30% of high school GPA to seek automatic admission. And so that's pretty exciting. And we have thousands of students actually availing of that option. We're one of the few states that offers free community college to our students. It's a last dollar program, right? So if they have to fill out the FAFSA, but if they, whatever difference between the FAFSA and support they need, that is available. We run a FAFSA challenge. We want to support our students to complete FAFSAs. We also have dual credit grants, in fact, funded through a big part funded through the ARPA, thanks to the legislature. We have grants that have gone to districts and grants that are going out to our higher education partners that are allowing our students to earn college credit while in high school. And to reiterate, college credit doesn't just mean four-year college. It can be two-year college. It can be an occupational course that's a credit-based course that's offered at our colleges. Students are pursuing all sorts of pathways through those programs. So we know the data, we're tracking the data, we're providing actionable information to districts, and we're providing the requisite supports to make sure students don't get disengaged, and then ultimately disconnected.
So Ajit, thank you for that. And I hope it just gives you a really the overview of how we're using data and information to inform our actions. And another plug for EdSite, our EdSite data portal, which is an envy of many, many states in the country, that you can access this information. We also make sure that families know they can access this information. We provide training for families as to how to use our data portal to have information. The last one we did was how is my school doing, and then how is my child doing in school, and how to get information to support. And so with certainly my commitment to data transparency, making sure that everyone across the board in our state can access this information, of course, supporting our school districts. You can see how an early indication tool that's used by districts can mobilize community supports, can mobilize efforts around our students at an individual level. So just wanted to share that. And so, John, I know we don't have a lot of time, but we're going to jump into attendance.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Here's a quick snapshot of the attendance results that show the differences over time from school year 2018-19 up until October of this year. The same lines apply, as Ajit mentioned before, our high need students in the orange and all students in the blue bar. As a reminder, chronic absenteeism is missing 10% or more of days, so 10% or more of the enrollment as the school year goes on, but over the course of the school year, that's 18 days. So just remember, 18 days is almost 4 weeks of school for a 5-day school week. A number of systematic structures. I'm not going to go through this. It really just I wanted to point out the fact that we address this through our tiers, through tier 1, 2, and 3. And we have different types of initiatives to support students, whether they are just missing a few days or whether they're chronically absent. And I'll go over a number of these really quickly. There's a lot of information on your slides. There's a lot of links on your slides, so we'll leave you to it. So a couple of them, one of them is called Talk Tuesdays, which is our biennial conversation with folks on the district level. We also published something called High School Bright Spots. Many of you have heard of the Learner Engagement and Attendance Program, the LEAP program. We're going to introduce our School is Better With You campaign. And then, of course, targeted supports for Alliance districts ongoing across the agency. So Talk Tuesdays, every other week, we get together with anyone on the district who is working on chronic absenteeism or attendance. We also get together with advocates are part of that conversation. We have specific speakers who come in and talk about targeting high school students, targeting elementary school students, targeting students who are experiencing homelessness, students in special education. We had Office of Early Childhood in talking about the early grades, starting in preschool with good attendance. So they're very targeted. It's a community of practice, and a lot of information is shared about successes and challenges in specific targeted groups that we're talking about. Bright Spots, I'll let you look at that. That is a specific look at high schools and the work that has to be done in high schools, and how we're working toward getting to be a shift away from thinking that when high school absences happen, that they are students just don't want to be there, and punitive approaches to discipline. So we're looking at opportunities to support regular school attendance in high school. The LEAP program, just a couple of statistics on that. This is our relational home visiting program. To date, we've conducted site visits or home visits to over 27,000 students. through 54,000 visits to schools. This year alone, our 200 or so home visitors have conducted over 17,000 visits to homes. And this is some evidence of the success. We had our CSERC, our Connecticut Education Research Collaborative, conducted an in-depth study. So this is an evidence-based program in Connecticut. You can see the results above. But in addition to that, one of the most important things are some of the relational supports or relational results, including our families are telling us there's improved family school relationships, improving student engagement, student achievement, feelings of belonging, access to resources, and expectations of accountability. A lot of intangibles that are not showing up in the data, but make that connection with families to our schools. So this slide shows the changes between when we began, both pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, and then moving into post-pandemic. 12 of the 14 districts reflected lower chronic absenteeism in 23 as compared to 22. And 7 districts showed evidence of reduction in chronic absenteeism, both in the 21 and 22 school year compared to 23. This is more information, just so you know that we have conducted over 100 virtual trainings. We've had 30 additional states participate in those training, in addition to other districts across the state. So the success of LEAP is not only branching out across the state, and districts are self-funding their own LEAP model, but we're seeing other states and actually provinces in Canada who are implementing the model as well. This is, as I mentioned, our School is Better With You campaign, which is our social media and media campaign, reminding students that school is better with you. We want you in the building. We want welcoming schools. This is a brand that's posted all over schools. We have banners and we have umbrellas and all kinds of things for students and teachers in school to remind them that we want them in school. So I'm going to pause there. I want to introduce Dr. Anderson from East Hartford Schools. As the Commissioner mentioned, we think it's critically important for this group to hear directly from our schools and superintendents about both the challenges and the successes that they face on a daily basis. So, Dr. Anderson.
Good afternoon. I appreciate being here, and I apologize. My voice, where everyone I think is still getting over something. So
Can I get you to state your name, please, for the
I'm
record?
Thomas Anderson, Superintendent, East Hartford Public Schools.
Great, welcome.
Thank you. And so there's a lot. So there's a lot of, we look at the data, we can analyze it, we can put all of our resources in place. East Hartford has benefited from the LEAP program, the home visits and those type of things. But I think what I wanted to do, just really quickly mention about, there has to be the humanistic factor. So we can do the home visits, but if we're not building trust with our families, and we have our family support specialists, our parent engagement specialists, and there's a lot of work in our schools reaching out to families. That has been the critical piece in terms of really attacking attendance, whether we're talking strictly about the chronic absenteeism, getting parents to understand that 1 to 2 days a month may not seem like a lot, but when you add it up in totality, it is. And I think that's what we've been missing a little bit. That, I arrived in East Hartford in July from another district outside of the state. So attendance impacts us everywhere in all regions. So the conversation is very similar, and really looking at how we build that trust, how we take that time to pull our families in, understand the value systems. It doesn't matter with the languages we speak or the economics and those type of things. I think we have to continue. What we've been trying to do is really take the time to build those relationships, as simple as it sounds. But there is often enough where we don't take that time to really do that. And I think that's really what's benefited us right now, that level of engagement, really having, from a high school standpoint, making more of those phone calls, reaching out to families in real time versus at the end of the day. From our elementary standpoint, with our, we have a pre-K program, although I call it a pre-K through 12 trajectory. Also looking at our adult education, because some of our adult education individuals are parents in the school system. So how are we informing and educating them about the importance of backing it up and not having their school experience at a time that may not have been as positive, really dig deeply into understanding what the future is going to hold for, for our children overall. And, one other point when we think about, we mentioned about belonging and trust. Well, what does that look like? We all are still struggling with a lot of things as a result of the pandemic. But one thing I've been saying in the past is that the pandemic happened, it exposed some things that we weren't paying as close attention to as we should have before. And again, I think now it's had a lot of us wake up, give more attention, resources, but we have to be smart with the resources. And how are we really taking advantage of what the state is doing? You know, the commissioner, I mean, there's some great opportunities for us. And I think the work that we're doing really gets down to how we navigate and manage our parents.
So thank you so much for putting that in the room. And we look at numbers, but these are our students. And so the numbers give us the ability to have the conversation. But when I visit districts, and which why I wanted the superintendent here, this is working with individual students. And so we look at the numbers and we say, well, that, you know, it's 30% or it's 40%, and oh, you're still at that level, right? It is about working individually with families and individually with students, and no two sometimes are alike in terms of the challenges. We learned from that from our home visits. We did a survey, over 5,000 families responded to that survey and letting us know it's issues of trauma, it's issues of transportation, it's issue of housing. You see how this now takes all of us, internal to the school system and external to the system, to work together on this. And so I won't take the time to tell you the stories of what some districts are doing and spending resources. When you have a child that may be having struggles walking, it's a walker to school, and you feel unsafe, what does that look like? Partnering with community providers to provide a ride. It is the trauma or challenges in a home sometimes, and the school sending in resource to make sure we get that child up and out in the morning. It's those kinds of issues that we're talking about. And I put this in the space. It's not about blaming, it's supporting. It is supporting, but it takes us, it's inside the schoolhouse doors and outside the schoolhouse doors for the things that we're working on together. So I want you to see, when you see the numbers, there are families, there's students behind those numbers, and there's individual efforts. And sometimes you may have solved an issue for a month or so, and then you go back, right? And another issue, right, surfaces, and you have to work through that. So when I look at the numbers from where I sit and I see the efforts that are being made, I so appreciate and thank our districts for the work they're doing, because you know what goes in behind it. When you look at the numbers, you look at the work that goes behind it. So I'll pause there and we'll talk about school discipline.
So the next 4 slides contain our most recent data around student discipline. So just to contextualize this information, when we talk of student discipline data, we're talking about students receiving in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, or an expulsion. And I'm not going to go into each of the slides necessarily, but just to say that in general, compared to the pandemic, we've actually seen a decrease in in-school suspension, but an increase in out-of-school suspension and expulsion. We also know that certain types of incident types, or what our districts classified student behaviors, are showing increases after the pandemic, while others are showing decreases. So for example, what's the sort of most subjective of this is like school policy violations. These are like students violating some kind of school rule or policy and receiving a suspension or an expulsion, typically a suspension. That has declined, but some other areas, such as physical and verbal confrontation, or weapons in school, or drugs, alcohol, tobacco, have seen increases, significant increases. So in the case of drug, alcohol, tobacco, we're talking about use of electronic nicotine delivery systems, or ENDS, commonly referred to as vapes, e-cigarettes. We've seen significant numbers in that area. We've also seen significant increase in marijuana possession and use among our student population. So you see some of those incident types showing big increases. And then we get to suspension rate, which is really looking at disproportionality in our suspension rates. What is the percentage of students who are receiving at least one suspension or expulsion? So if you look at the very last column and you look at the total of 7% at the bottom. So what that means is that roughly 1 out of 14 students statewide is experiencing a suspension or expulsion. But when you look at Black African American students, you see a 13%. So that's roughly 1 out of 8 now. And then when you look at white students, you see a 4.3%. So 1 out of 24 roughly. So you see that these, like, while the in-school suspensions are down, out-of-school suspensions are up. Our suspension rate is sort of similar to what it was prior to the pandemic, 7%, slightly higher than 6.7, 6.8 prior to the pandemic. But the disparity, the disproportionality continues to exist. The rate of suspension has decreased for students of color a little bit compared to the prior to the pandemic. So Black students, it's at 13%. Prior to the pandemic, it was 14 and 15%. So it's slightly lower, yes, but there's still the disproportionality. So I just want to call your attention to that. And I believe the last data slide really speaks to our youngest students. And again, this is an area that the department has been reporting on and publicizing even prior to the pandemic. This is looking at students in pre-K through 2. And by default, any suspension in this grade range has to be an in-school suspension unless the behavior is violent or sexual in nature that endangers others. So the good news is that, yes, the number of suspensions and the number of students receiving suspensions compared to pre-pandemic has declined. So things are heading in the right direction. The legislative act on this was, I think, in 2015, modifying the prohibiting out-of-school suspension or expulsion unless it's violent or sexual in nature. So we have seen a decline compared to pre-pandemic levels, but it's still there. And the department is actually engaged in deep conversations with districts to identify very specifically the types of behaviors and really trying to understand what is the actual behavior that's being exhibited in the classroom that is sort of showing up to us as X or Y and resulting in an out-of-school suspension. So we're engaged in discussions with districts around really getting down, again, as Commissioner said, going down to the student level and trying to sort of really understand what is the actual behavior that's happening in the classroom. And I know John now is going to discuss like more of the what are we doing about this? And there's again a slew of them.
And he's going to wrap up. There's a slew of efforts and you've got them on your slides, but we're again wanting to make sure we're in time.
Yes, so finishing up and just to clarify also, even for grades 3 to 12, the discipline would have to be an in-school suspension as well, unless the student poses a threat to the community or disrupts the educational process, or if prior attempts to support that student to reduce the behavior have been unsuccessful. So ISS is really the go-to for all grades. All right, so you've seen this before, our family guides that were developed by the School Discipline Collaborative. Last time we were in front of you, we shared that. We're working also with the Office of Early Childhood because the way the law reads, the pre-K students should never be suspended out of school. So we're working with those folks as well and tip sheets to de-escalate behavior in our youngest students. And as many of you know, there's a charge to the School Discipline Collaborative to do some work with regard to the definitions and the behaviors around violent or sexual nature. Just know that we actually have a survey in the field now with 40 districts to take a look specifically at specific individual incidents and specific individual students. What was the behavior? What was the adult action? And why did the adult in that situation decide that rose to the level of an out-of-school suspension? So we're going to be at the kid level to find out like what's happening and what are the reactions and actions taken as a result. So that will help us pull that in, take a look at how we can provide supports and training to districts in that regard. And I will stop there, Commissioner.
No, thank you very much. As you can tell, a lot that we can unpack and have a conversation about. More than anything else, I just really want you to know the work that is happening. It's deeply front of mind for everything that we do. When we talk about supporting, and in the cover slide, you saw the numbers of our students. Sometimes folks think about the students and not think about the 513,513. students that we have in our state and what we're trying to do there. One more dashboard I want to draw your attention to, which we didn't talk about today, but just to let you know, students experiencing homelessness. We developed, thanks to Ajit and his team, a dashboard specifically for that. Take a look at it when you have a moment. Over 5,000 students that are experiencing homelessness. I think over 81% of them are students of color. There's a lot of information there. Again, it's a call to action for all of us, for whatever sectors we're in, to do this work together. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, SD. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for your team and for your data. Ever since we started with the JJPOC, we had none of this data. We didn't have the opportunity to actually start to look at what are we doing, how are we affecting people, and what locations do we need to focus in on. And I think you guys have done a fantastic job of providing us with a dashboard that gives us the opportunity to look at, are we doing better? What are the things we need to improve? As I looked through some of the data up there, my first question is, how do you engage the districts in retrieving the data, and have you used that data to help them in their thinking about changing in their systems?
So since the pandemic, since the beginning of the pandemic, we would, prior to the pandemic, we would collect data on an annual basis, right? Well, that's not terribly helpful in terms of chronic absenteeism to find out at the end of the year, because the year has gone by. We are now collecting absenteeism data on a monthly basis. So that gets both collected by the district and brought to the Department of Education, so that we can in real time say, hey, something's happening in this district or something happening in these districts, so that we can provide professional development and try to support the district's work in alleviating that before it becomes truancy, throughout the school year.
If you could add the discipline data as well. So Connecticut, I think, is the only state in the country, so you should know that, that's collecting this attendance data on a monthly basis. And so why is that important? We now know in real time to provide the kinds of support that we need to. And so we have a lot of conversation about data, but the thing is, we have the data, right? So we have the information, so it allows us to be truly informed about our efforts. How do we support districts? How do we embed staff if we need to, meeting with districts on a weekly basis to address these? How do we incorporate that in a cross-divisional team that's working with our highest need districts? We report it to our state board. When districts sometimes come before board, when our charter schools come before our state board, we look at these metrics as well, and we're looking at plans for how they're addressing it. But not only that, we're also providing the level of support. And then we have the tiers for the discipline. John, if you just want to quickly talk about that. And we're using that to outreach specifically to districts so we can have these conversations and support the efforts that they need to make.
The pre-K is very disturbing, and the kindergarten is very disturbing, where children are still growing and developing. They're looking for leadership, and that's not suspension. Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
So the tiered system is, when we look at the data, Ajit's team has developed a system to put folks into tiers, tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. Tier 4 are districts that have high rates of out-of-school suspension and expulsions. They're our highest tier. Tier 3 looks more specifically at disproportionality in the data. So we take both of those out, because in some cases it's high disproportionality and high use of out-of-school suspension, and in some cases it's just high use, and some cases it's just high disproportionality. So that way we can bring those tiers together and say, hey, we need a community of practice around disproportionality in these districts, right? All of the districts get a touch, but tiers 3 and 4 get a higher touch.
Questions? I'm going to open up questions. Really? You just got all of that data and
I'll press it.
Sarah?
I did try to pause to see if other hands went up first. There's so much data there, John. I
Hold the
think it's
microphone to you, please.
closer. There's so much great data there. So I just want to acknowledge that. I mean, EdSite is terrifically informative. And you've heard this from me before, but I just think it's important to underscore, like, for example, when we look at the chronic absenteeism data and the discipline data, thinking about, and you talked when your opening remarks were like, what are some of the takeaways for this committee's work and its subcommittees? I think about like, I think our data also tells us like, what are the types of schools and programs where those numbers are really high, right? So like if, for example, the rate of Black student suspension is about 13–14%, well, we know in some of our alternative schools or other sort of not, separate schools, those are really high, right? They could even be 60, 70, 80% of the population, student population is subject to suspension. I just looked up a school while I was sitting here, where 65% of students with special education in an alternative program are subject to suspension, right? So when I think about like the work of the education subcommittee here, really, and we know that those are schools that are part of our school to prison pipeline, right? So I think it would be helpful, moving ahead to also focus maybe in subcommittee on the program, the strategies to work with those programs who are educating some of our highest need youth, where those rates of student sanction are extraordinarily high still. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, or if you have any information about the trends that you see at some of the non-mainstream alternative programs, be they state-approved private or public alternative schools.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I know we've talked about the alternative programs. So in 2017, we developed guidelines for alternative programs around a number of things. Since then, we conducted a pilot program with a number of alternative programs, and we have the data that shows the challenges that they face, right? So these are, so everybody knows, these are students who are in, their home school and either were expelled and then are out in an alternative placement program, or are out there so they're their highest need, highest risk folks, right? So we're gonna revisit that guidance. We're gonna revisit the guidance that we issued in 2017. We've been working with our legal office, and that guidance, based on the statute, has the force of law. So we're talking about things like making sure that those students get at least a half a day of instruction to be counted, and we're talking about ramping up additional efforts to support work around chronic absenteeism. So the community of practice that we talked about in discipline, we're going to have a community of practice with alternative school programs to talk specifically about the importance of attendance and how we work with those organizations to make sure kids are in school.
And Sarah, I'd add to that as well, because I look for concrete actions around that. So we use the data to inform that. But as your committees are meeting, and I'm saying this thinking about the staffing capacity that we have, but because we're so embedded in some of these districts, because of being Alliance District or that we follow, that would like to really have the conversation about what the thoughts are here, so we can think about what we're currently doing and see how we embed all those, so we're not creating or bifurcating systems of support. So I'll put that in the space for how can we have those conversations. As you know, a few years ago, we started looking at this chronic absence data and saw that special education itself was an area that we needed to take a look at. We disaggregate the data by your students or experiencing homelessness, special education, all of that. And so we use that to help inform our interventions, and would like to do that together. So thoughts and ideas from your subcommittee certainly would want to be a part of some of those conversations, or the team that's working with some of these districts, so we can think about what's working, where are we, and what more can be done.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. I just wanted to ask a little bit, in the start of the presentation, you talked about the LEAP effect and how, or the LEAP effect program, and how some of the kids, you're uncovering layers of needs, right? Can you talk a little bit about how CSDE is partnering with, whether it's other state agencies or other nonprofits, to address that complex needs that you're uncovering during some of these home visits and in-depth meetings with the kids?
Really awesome question about us working together. I'll let John speak a little bit, and then I'll talk about that as well.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a great question. I mean, the beauty of the LEAP program is we started it during the pandemic, and the idea behind it was we didn't know what families needed, right? We knew their students were not coming to school. We didn't know what they needed. So we were partnering with DSS to make sure do they need to get on SNAP program? Are they food insecure? Is that a thing? Back then we were doing a lot of remote learning. We worked with our Department of Administrative Services to make sure that those folks had hotspots, that they were able to access the platforms that their teachers were teaching on. All of those things to find out exactly what's going on in the family. So these are several visits that happen. So these are a series of visits. So we don't want you to think this is the old truancy visit where it's a knock on the door and you drag your kid to school. This is the first visit that happens is really about, hey, what's going on? How you doing? What do you need? Not your kid has to come to school. So we find out like, hey, so-and-so has to work because someone in the house who lost their job. How can we help connect them to that? Do they need SNAP? But so there are so many amazing stories. We try to get one of our home visitors to come here about our home visitors are being invited back for dinner. They're going back to their houses on weekends and they're part of the family and they're learning all about that. And they're able to share that information with them. So it's really, when we say relational, we mean relational. It's really about getting to know the family and that connectedness with the school and with the home visitor. So that's the beauty of it, building those relationships. So then you can have all kinds of conversations about it.
And then we uncover issues. So for example, the family that's struggling with housing, instability, those home visitors are able to make those connections. But at a state level, these are conversations. I see my fellow commissioner, DCF commissioner here. Those are the conversations that we're having across agencies. The governor just put together the Interagency Council on Ending Homelessness. And we're all, I bought the data tour or first inaugural meeting about our students experiencing homelessness and putting that in that space. We have a partnership with Office of Early Childhood, Department of Housing, looking at housing vouchers as we're, for students in Head Start and all of that. So literally we're trying to make sure the system now is supporting the family, supporting the students as well. And so when we talk about it does take all of us and the systems working in concert, whether it's public health, whether it's DSS, we're talking to DSS about Medicaid funding, those kinds of things. It's allowing us to have those conversations from what we're learning. Home visitors are now getting some training on trauma, first aid, mental health. All of that really gives us an opportunity. There are other home visiting programs across the state as well. And how do we coalesce what we're learning through this effort? And we also surveyed students as well, but that's another presentation. We've heard from them in terms of what it is that they need from us. But great question. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson, would you like to say anything because you are experiencing this currently as we go through this?
Yes. So I think that, from what I'm hearing, it is that is what it is. And the continued relationships, again, East Hartford benefits from the LEAP program. And there was an excellent event in the fall where the governor had come along with the commissioner and some others to recognize the work that was being done. But from the social worker there at the high school, when she spoke about it, it really is building those relationships. You have students that are there that gave testimony to how, making it simple, how they weren't coming to school, but because of the relationship, they felt more obligated. They had that sense of obligation to the other adult at the building. So that also helps to have the other adult in their life to help motivate them to get there every day.
So it doesn't, I guess my fear is that the children might feel that we are intruding. And I don't know, how are the kids incorporated in the visits at home with the LEAP program?
I think at least for us, it's because of the relation. There is some sort of relationship already because they have been at school.
Okay.
So you find someone there that can make that connection. You have very good people that are good communicators, make them feel important, all of those type of things. You get the right people going to the home, so it's less intrusive, but it is still a challenge though.
Okay, thank you.
And we also hear, Madam Chair, students who say, you know what, somebody cares if I'm there or not. They're going to ask about me if I don't show up. It shows that you care that I'm there. And so we hear that from students a lot. Like, it's not just you go missing and nobody's asking about you. Somebody actually cares. So they're making that relationship, building that bond with someone else, but also with their peers. And we see that happening in that space as well.
Erica Bromley?
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. In regards to the discipline data, I think I have heard, I just wanted to know if anybody has heard of this. I've heard in a couple of communities that it sounds like that out of school suspension has been an option instead of in school because of a lack of space to hold kids in school suspension. So that was the first part. I just wondered if anybody had heard about that. And then the second part really has to do with sort of the need, I think, to have more alternatives to discipline, whether it be in school or out of school suspension, working with community agencies, having those kind of alternatives, whether it be for suspensions or expulsions. I think that's something that we need to begin to push a lot more, to have some options for some kids to not be absent, to do something productive, to have some kind of alternative. So I just didn't know if anybody wanted to comment on that. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Erica. So the question about in-school suspension, yes, we have been made aware of a couple of districts who seem to have been erring on the side of out-of-school suspension, be it because of a misunderstanding by leadership or space issues or others. We actively work with those districts to try to get them back on track. That's ongoing work. When we hear about this, we literally deploy a team. And through our alliance districts, we have teams that are responsible for each of the alliance districts. Those groups get together and we do some cross-agency planning. And I like to say we show them the light, and if that doesn't work, we bring the heat.
And, and John has said this, it's gone out to districts himself. So I know they recently made a visit to a district, just looking at the data that we're seeing, and we go out and I go to districts as well. So we can have those conversations.
Thank you. Maurice?
Thank you, Rep. Walker, and thank you, SD, for the fantastic presentation. I would just say some of the comments that Commissioner just made about individuals feeling valued when they come to school and important, and that their presence will be missed if they aren't there. I think, as another person spoke about earlier, the people who visit these families, building that trust with the families and the students, I think that's invaluable, and you can see it in the numbers. I saw a 6% decrease from the heights of 22 in the chronic absenteeism. The increase in attendance after 6 months for students both in pre-K through 5th grade and 6th grade through 12th. So I do think, as you mentioned earlier, this isn't a one thing fits all situations. You're taking individuals and their individual situations and trying to address their needs. So I just want to thank you for the efforts you're making in the presentation you gave today. But there's one other question.
Who has their hand up? Oh. Ms. Samuel?
Good afternoon, everyone. First, let's talk about the homelessness. You had a very specific number, 5,000. Out of 5,000, you said 81% are of color. So I don't understand, like, why aren't there a string? There should be a net. You have a number. So, and then if you crosswalk that, how many of those homeless children are part of your expelled pre-K? You know what I mean? So are you disaggregating some of this? Because I don't understand how we know these numbers. And those kids still stuck. And that's number one. So out of the 5,000, you said 81% are of color. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then what are we doing? And then number two, what are you holding? Are you holding the districts accountable? Because you just said, I'm looking at the word here, you're going to revisit. We've been revisiting this for a minute. Our systems were from Care for Kids. We're supposed to be streamlined so that state agencies have the same information across agencies. So I'm trying to understand, why are we revisiting some of the things that we said we were addressing already? So about the homeless kid, what are we doing with those like now? Because they're homeless and there's 5,000. And I heard the governor say, we got some surplus monies from ERPA. I don't know if it's true or not, but if we have it, This is something we can address now. It doesn't necessarily need to be revisited other than just doing it. Now, if I'm wrong about that, and then lastly, but not least, Talk Tuesdays. Who are you talking to? You just can't keep talking to yourselves. Talk Tuesdays, you can expand it to your parent, your student governance councils. You can expand it because as long as you're talking to you, then the parents are going to be reactive because they're going to be not in the know. So look at your Talk Tuesdays, maybe incorporate it, and then maybe we all talking on Tuesday. Every family, every community, every agency. So at least we're on the same board. Thank you so much. I'm just confused because we keep saying what we are going to do, but we've had these conversations before and it looked like we were saying we were doing them. Thank you so much.
Ms. Samuels, we are doing.
Okay.
And that's why the numbers are where they are in terms of the progress that we're seeing. And so, but we say we don't do a victory lap because there's a lot of work to be done. And that's why we're having this conversation here, which is really so important. And we have the data because it's reported to us. And so when you get a chance, look at the dashboard, 5,093 students. And you can also see where they're spending their nighttime. Are they doubling up? Are they couch surfing? Are they in parks? Are they in buses? We literally have that information. And so that's why we're having this conversation when I said it takes all of us, because some of that is not on the school. Some of that expands to the community. And so that's why it's so important. This body is so valuable. We've got legislators, we've got OPM, we've got all of you. And so I hope a part of today is us recognizing what is your part? What can you do from your sphere of influence and from where you sit and from your sector? Because it is all of us. We take responsibility and accept, and it is accountability and support for our districts. And when we talk about these visits that the team is having and going out and all of that, and we're not just talking to ourselves and Talk Tuesdays, we're talking to a lot of school districts, a lot of folks who are doing this work, a lot of community partners that are in that space with us, helping to address the issues. So I can assure you, we're not just talking about it. We're literally at work doing the work that we're doing here, and which is why we brought it to you here today. So I'd love to have further conversations so we can have, and that really is the point. We don't have the time today to go through everything, but as you can see, there's a lot of information and a lot of effort to point us to what we need to do and where we need to go. The issue of homelessness, we've talked about it here. You understand this is a statewide issue around homelessness and families and what we're doing there. There's a slice of it for students, and we need to be talking about how they fit in the picture as well. But trust me, we're doing more than talking. We're literally doing.
Lastly, can there be a survey then so that what you're saying, we can make sure what the people are saying? So I think there needs to be a survey to the families based on what you're saying you're doing, so that we can it's a checks and balance, right? That way we're all saying the same thing, because you could be saying this, that there's all this trust, but I can go to 30 families who wouldn't let you nowhere near their doorstep. So I'm confused with just how, I understand trustworthy. And I think we need to just aggregate those surveys to communities, because if your numbers are 81% of color, it's hard for me to say that them same families are saying that you're doing great when I know some of them won't even let you in the door. So I'm just saying, and maybe if we get a survey from the constituents, right, then we can all make sure we're saying the same thing. Doesn't mean you're not trying, doesn't mean this is great. We have the data, but just make sure we're all saying the same thing. Because it's from my end, it doesn't sound like you're saying the same thing. And that just because it could be because of need, right, in the post-pandemic. So I'm just saying, think about a survey.
Thank you. But I think the commissioner was making a point for all of us.
Okay.
If you think about it, this type of data we've not had.
Right.
We've never had the detail that we got in this. People always say, oh, that's not true. That's not, well, we're actually getting the details of what's going on, and we're going down into and looking at how do we make those combinations? How do we address those? We're not going to get it immediately, but we're going to start the conversations. And that's why we bring this data here, so that everybody in this room can hear about the circumstances of what's going on in the communities. Because I don't like anecdotal. We need to know exactly how many people are being discriminated against, how many people are living outside, how many people are hungry, how many people are homeless. And we don't get that. And that's the most important thing that we do now, so that we can't say it's a mystery or we don't know. We do know, but we need the numbers now to prove it and talk about it. And we all need to come together. Everybody has the skills, and you are a major community organizer. You know these things. So let's talk to the education. We put a survey together. You help us go out to the communities. We help them get the LEAP program going. We help them to address the number of kids that are not going to school and figuring out how do we do it, because it's not just one fix. People need jobs, people need homes, people need to have support. And that's what I think the data was here. And the purpose of it was so that all of us could get angry about it and get passionate about what we can do and get engaged, because too many people sit around and don't ask questions and don't talk like you. And this time, maybe we can get everybody to be engaged and make that move that's better for our children in the state of Connecticut. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd love to, geez, now you want to talk. You mean Gwen? See, thank you, Miss Gwen, because you got everybody now. Everybody, okay, I'm going to let a couple of people, but we have another presentation to go to. So, Representative Porter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the presentation. First, I apologize for my tardiness, but I do want to go back to the conversation around violent or sexual nature, because I do happen to chair the Education Subcommittee. Sarah made some great points. Thank you for that. But when we're talking about gathering data and compiling and really trying to define what it is we mean by that, my question is, how long have we been doing it? And how is it being reported? Like, when you say you're gonna gather information, what does that information look like? Because I'm trying to figure out, if we don't have a definition for it, haven't been able to define it, how have we been able to suspend and expel children based on a violent or sexual nature?
So thank you for the question. So we have specific codes. So if they determine that it was something violent, what is that subcode? Is it fighting? Is it we still use terms like fighting and battery. Recognize that's hard to convince anyone that a preschool student can commit battery. But what we're trying to determine right now is, in 40 to 60 specific situations in schools where kids were suspended out of school for one of those, either of a sexual nature or of a violent nature, what could that child possibly have done to raise to the level of that their behavior was of a violent nature, so much so that you had to send them out. So what we believe is happening is that adult actions in the building are misinterpreting that behavior and thinking that that's egregious and aggressive, when it really is likely more developmentally expected for a child of that age. So this allows us to say, okay, we have specific data on what happened, what was the consequence. So we're working with the Office of Early Childhood to be able to provide some support for the district to say, you know what, this wasn't violent. This you would anticipate this behavior of a child in first grade who was frustrated because of XYZ. So that's going to be able for us to say, how are they making the decision, and to dial that back. That it was probably an inappropriate decision.
And this will be a continued conversation.
Yes, and I have one last question, if you don't mind, Madam Chair. And we can answer this offline, but I just want to ask the question. How long have we been doing this? How long has this policy been in effect, where we are suspending and expelling pre-K students for a sexual or violent nature?
I think that since 2015.
Yep.
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair.
I would ask that, okay, the data that we got today was data that should immediately go to all of our subcommittees to be broken down and looked at and evaluated. The Education Committee, the Diversion Committee, all of those committees can utilize this data to help them in steering everybody towards the policies that we need to start to focus on and get that work done. So I thank you for the presentation, and you can have the last word. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say, and you'll follow that up, I think we have specific legislation that is asking the School Discipline Collaborative to come up with definitions. So that's spurring the actual action right now from the 2015 data. So there's a reason that we're digging deeper. It's what we call root cause analysis, right? We're trying to get deeper so it can inform our action and our decision and the definition that we're now required in legislation to have. So thank you. I just really want to thank you. I love the passion in the room, and I think it is a passion for action. I hope it is, because it is all of us together. I'll also share with you the survey that was done of the 5,000 families in Spanish and in English that responded to us that I referred to, and also the survey to students. So we have that information as well, so for everyone to have. But everyone in the room, thank you. I really wanted to be here today. Thank you. I appreciated it. And we have a lot of work to do together, and we're all in it together.
And I also want to let everybody know that there is a dashboard. This data is on the website for SDE. Your district, everybody in here is not from the same district. All of you should go in there and look at it and see what's going on in your district so that that could be your calling for what we need to do and how we need to work on it. And we work within all of our communities because this is the whole state. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you very, very much. Next we have, okay, what's next? I'm sorry. Next, we have the Department of Children and Families, the Education Administrator, Dr. Glenn Worthy, and John Tarka, Assistant Superintendent, and Tina Mitchell. And Commissioner, would you like to introduce your group?
Certainly, and good afternoon. I'd like to first start by saying thank you to SDE for that incredible presentation and double down on the sentiments that we are all in this together. And so DCF is very much a partner with you, and appreciate everyone around this and in this room really banding together to address this crisis that we're having with our kids and our families, and doing it together is what's needed. So my name is Jody Hill Lilly. For those of you who don't know, I am 13 days into this job. Thank you. And one thing I wholeheartedly appreciate, I love seeing the youth in the room. I know they'll be like, why is she looking at me? But I love seeing the youth in the room, and I love to hear the constituent voices. And I love the fact that we are all in this together in the struggle. I am pleased to really present to you. I think this is the second time the Juvenile Justice Education Unit has presented to you all. We made quite an investment in this group, and I've, in my 13 days, had a chance to at least get remotely familiar with what's happening through Deputy Commissioner Michael Williams. And I think you're going to really find this data that's going to be presented very compelling, and it will add to the presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Worthy and his team.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? I'm going to do it real quickly because I guess when we have 20 minutes to do our presentation.
No.
Oh, good.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Can take a little extra.
You're the best. You are the best. So here's the agenda for our presentation. We're going to review our work, give you some data on the students, their math and reading data. We're going to talk about our work with reentry and transition. We're going to talk about how we support the schools within the facilities. And then at the end, we'll give some recommendations on our next steps. So our work is divided into 4 buckets. Data and academic accountability measures is implementing and utilizing a tool across all facilities to gather baseline data on student achievement and using that data to drive instruction. Reentry and transition is creating a statewide structure to reintegrate students into their communities with the necessary supports, and create a network of schools to support teachers and administrators' effectiveness, and also provide space to share best practices. Each facility is using what's called STAR assessment. The STAR assessment allow us to identify those students who are in need of additional supports in order to meet their learning goals. Also, STAR allow us to set goals for each student and evaluate and monitor progress towards that goal. Here's 5 columns. The first column is the facilities that we're working with. The second column talks about the number of students who have been tested. The third column are students who are identified as special ed. The fourth column are kids who are have 504 plans. And the last column is the kids who are being identified or in the process in being identified as special ed. There have been 95 students who've been tested. Out of that 95 students, 72% are identified as special ed.
Good afternoon. I'm Tina Mitchell. I'm one of the assistant superintendents for the JJEU. The next couple slides we're going to be showing are STAR performance data for the CSSD facilities. The first one is on reading assessments. And this shows each grade level, the students in which grade level they are, and then where they fall. So we're going to take, like, if you look at grade 10 as an example, grade 10 shows that 6 students in the STAR assessment scored within the 1st to 3rd grade reading level. The orange bar shows that 8 students in 10th grade scored on a 4th through 6th grade reading level. The gray bar shows 2 students that fell between the 7th and 8th grade reading level, and 3 students are at a high school level in grade 10 in reading. So you can look over each grade individually. They're all lined up the same way. The next assessment is the math assessment, when we can look at the 9th grade students, and we can see that 6 of them are in a 1st through 3rd grade math ability. 12 are within the 4th through 6th grade ability. 1 is in the 7th and 8th grade math ability, and 1 student is at a high school ability in math. So we can see that these are all baseline data, which means that when the students came in, they were initially assessed. Currently, the facilities are in process of assessing again for the mid-year, so we don't have comparative data right now for the CSSD facilities.
Good afternoon. I'm John Tark, Assistant Superintendent. I'm going to be talking about the Manson data. And like Dr. Worthy said, we were able to use the same screener in the CSSD facilities as we are at Manson. So we're going to have common data points. One difference that Ms. Mitchell outlined is that we actually have 2 data pairings at Manson. So the next slide shows just a quick snapshot of where we are with that data. And we want to really outline and emphasize 2 things. 1, that there is growth happening in the facilities. And 2, the students' levels when they're coming into the facilities are in need of a lot of support. And the next couple slides will clearly outline that. Next slide. So if you look on the slide on the left, that's the data that was collected in June, the baseline data, okay? And much like Ms. Mitchell outlined, the blue bars that you see are students in grades 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 that are reading on a 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade level. So although that's a blue bar, that's very much a red flag. And as educators, we know that students might fall behind, might get disengaged, might make these mistakes that gets them in this situation because they're not reading on grade level and they're disengaged. This data proves that, okay? Even so, seeing this high number, 6 and 8 students in grades 9 and 10 that are reading on a 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade reading level, you could see the progress being made whenever that same assessed group was assessed in October. You see that in grade 9, that number of students decreased. You see the orange bar increase, meaning that 2 of those students that were first assessed on 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade reading level have since improved their skills and are moving up the grade bands and making progress. That's not to say, Dr. Tucker said it so well, that's not a victory lap. That's an acknowledgement of progress, but we know we have to go further. It's the same situation that Ms. Mitchell spoke about. These students are functioning far below grade level, and this data really solidifies that, okay? So next slide. The next slide is math. It's a similar story. They are below grade level, but let's take a look at grade 9 between June and October. 5 students were on a 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade level with math. 4 were on a 4th, 5th, and 6th grade level. Okay, those numbers flipped. Okay, we're looking to see what best practices are being done. How do we support those great strategies happening in the classroom and maximizing that? So that's really the scope of our work with what this data has told us. Dr. Worthy?
Sorry. So after listening to Ms. Mitchell and Mr. Tarker, you'll see over 81% of our kids are in need of urgent intervention in math. It's the same thing in reading.
So one of the other areas that we've been working with the facilities collaboratively is with under credit recovery. We know that the students come undercredited and overaged. So this slide just shows how with the facilities, having opportunities and then being able to help with accessing credit recovery, the numbers have increased of participants within the credit recovery. We are also aware that within the facilities, sometimes there has been some issues and struggles with technology, Wi-Fi access, and just logistical things around planned time after school.
So the next slide really begins to discuss our pupil service specialists. We have 8 pupil service specialists that work with us. And these pupil service, what makes them so unique is that the pupil service specialists meet with the student while they're still in detention. Okay, so if you look at this graphic, this shows the roadmap of the work of our pupil service specialists in reentry, reentering back into the community, not reentering back into the facilities. Okay, so phase 1, you see that our pupil service specialist is making those connections, and the state outlined it so beautifully, talking about the relationship building. That's seen in how they connect with the student, how they connect with the family, how they connect with the school district, and laying that foundation and letting the school district know that we're going to be working on behalf of the students' reentry back into their home community. Phase 1 is that. Phase 2 is continuously building that relationship with the student while they're still in the detention centers, still in the facilities, strengthening that relationship, increasing the frequency, and making sure we're as proactive as possible in notifying the school districts that the student's going to be returning. As former principals, we've seen students come to our buildings when we were in that role, right from penitentiaries, not having these supports that we're putting in place now. So the more proactive we can be with school districts notifying them of students returning, the more seamless the transition is. That happens in phase 2. Phase 3 is when we are really, we're in the process of the student being released, and we're having those very important meetings with the receiving school district and receiving schools. That might be the PPT program placement meeting. That might be our reentry circles, which we will go into detail about, okay? That's really where our work is in the community. So whereas the PSS is with the student in all facets of their educational journey from incarceration to step down to in the community, our PSSs are along the way the whole time. Finally, phase 4 is the progress monitoring and maintenance. The student's been re-entered back into the community. We've reintegrated them. Our PSSs don't turn their backs then. They continue to stay with the student for weeks and months after to make sure that the skills that they've learned are sustainable. So that's the roadmap of the PSS work.
So I'm going to talk about a few data points in terms of our PSS work. The first one is the reentry and transition meetings. As Mr. Tarka said, you'll see this evident in phase 2 and 3 of the roadmap that he just spoke about. This data is from August to December. That's when school starts. That's the first half of the year. On average, they're having 6 correspondences with receiving school districts. And I just want to make clear that these meetings are happening concurrently with their reentry back into the community. Our correspondents are able to, with the LEA, our PSSs are able to tell them, if we know enough notice, what their release dates are going to be. They do make sure they set up like a tour, make sure they have a schedule all set, transportation. So we're ensuring that the meetings are being done as quickly as possible, but very thorough with the LEA. We want to make sure that these schools are notified. That was one of the things that came up when we met with the districts, that they wanted to know as soon as possible when students were going to re-enter, so that way they could be better prepared and we could have these meetings and this collaboration.
Thank you. So we wanted to have a separate slide just to really go into detail about the reentry circle process. When we designed this reentry circle process, in order to really make sure that the student felt supported, there were 3 key areas, and Ms. Mitchell touched on it in the previous slide. Okay, this is really village building at its core. This is what this work looks like in these 3 emphasis, three key areas of emphasis. 1 is embracing the student at the receiving school. We know that some students return to their home communities with a reputation they've been trying to shed. We know that students feel stigmatized and feel like they're being punished doubly after they return for the misdeeds that they made at a previous time in their life. We want to make sure receiving schools and programs accept this student for the work in progress that they are. So in doing that, we have very candid conversations with programs, with teachers, with behavior technicians, with the staff at the school to really give that student a clean, fresh start. I'm happy to report that in these reentry meetings, the schools have been very receptive to this. They are familiar with the restorative practice. They are familiar with that tone. Next is really village building. We want to make sure that when the student is back at their receiving school or at an outplacement program, once they come back into the school district, that the student really knows where to go on a day-to-day basis to get help. Working in New Haven, I knew that whenever I had a new student coming, I was going to make sure they knew where to go on the second floor to go see Mr. Brown if you had an issue. And really identifying those people that the student can go to, shaking their hands, making eye contact, building that relationship is so key for their day-to-day success. Finally, I'm still haunted at the fact that there are some students that have failed, that have not graduated, that have dropped out because of simple logistical errors. It can be something as small as a student thinks the bus picks them up at 7:30, when in reality it's at 7:28. So ironing out all those wrinkles, all those logistical details, making sure mom can get on Power School, making sure the parents can access the Spanish version, making sure they know where to get the schedule, all those little things so there's no distractions really can help the student be successful once they start getting into the routine of school. Lastly, the reentry circle process, the village building at its core, it's not going to just happen in a PPT. Usually these meetings take 1, 2, or 3 different meetings just to check off all the boxes. This is happening all the time. There's a flurry of it usually in the beginning of the school year. However, our pupil service specialists are really reentering students as we speak right now. Okay.
The next data point is on family engagement. We want to make sure that we're maintaining family engagement with the student's family throughout the whole process, their whole educational journey. So this starts off phase 1, if you could refer back to the roadmap, phase 1, and throughout every phase, we're maintaining contact. The pre-release contact with family engagement that we have is obviously we need to get consent to work with the student and access records. So we contact the family at that point, and while they're still in the facilities, we make contact pretty much weekly to gauge any updates that might have transpired, any updates our PSS can provide the families, just make sure they know that we're there and we're advocating anything they need us to work on with them. Post-release, it's about the reentry meetings that we've been talking about. When they're in the community, checking in, ensuring that they know that they're following them out, that they are visiting them at the school once a week to see how they're doing. And make sure they're prepared for any PPT meetings or any other meetings that they need to have at the school. We want to make sure parents' voices are heard and that their expectations are also valued by the school. So our PSSs work closely with them to ensure that happens throughout the whole journey. So these numbers just show the pre-release contact we've had between regions and MYI, and then the post-release, which averages out to 4 times a month, as I said before, like weekly contact with the family. The final data point for the PSS work is community supports. When we talk about community supports, it goes back to the village Mr. Tarka was talking about, who within the community is also working with us to work with the students. And that can be juvenile probation officers, programs like Project Longevity, mentors, DMS, DCF worker, clinician, therapist. It can be pretty much anyone who is in that village that we've already identified as a team that can help us move forward. So some of the contacts over a 10-month period, it's 3 times a month we might have contact with community supports. And in MYI, it's been over 8 months, it's been 4 times a month. This can actually fluctuate, as everyone knows. It depends on the case. It depends on where the student is and what they need, right? We always go back to what the student needs. We review that, revisit it before we make any decisions. But we want to make sure that we're always talking about the village, the student in the center, and making sure we're tailoring our services to the need of the student.
Sorry, Tina, we have one more data point. That was your final data point. All right. Data point number 4 is really the depth of the work our pupil service specialists are having, the conversations they're having with their students when they re-enter their home communities and their home schools. So I want to tell you a quick anecdote. We met with a student, and whenever we explained our role, the student was in very, very excited, finally that he was going to have somebody that could really navigate the education piece. And I asked him at the end, what do you need from us? He said, don't leave me. Don't leave me. I gotta move on because I'm getting goosebumps saying it. But this data really speaks to that. Yes, we're having conversations with the administration about the student returning, but they are pupil service specialists for the education unit. We're having conversations with the student's social worker, the student's behavior support staff, the student's instructional staff. So what the STAR assessment provides us is it doesn't just give us a number. It gives us a clear diagnostic as to where the student's skills are in terms of literacy and math. We take that data, we meet with the student's teachers and say, listen, Johnny's really struggling with decoding. You might want to modify some of your lessons to be more attuned to their ability level, because we know as educators that when the work is ability appropriate, the student's going to be working more appropriately. This slide really speaks to the many different conversations we're having with stakeholders at schools to really help our student be reintegrated appropriately. And as Ms. Mitchell outlined, we're in contact with the receiving schools once a week. We don't ever want schools to think that we're going to do a reentry circle and then turn our backs. Initially, Ms. Mitchell and I thought that we would be having our PSSs working with students 3 months after they reintegrated. It took one student for us to realize we were going to be much farther along and do it much longer. We really want to emphasize the sustainable supports and really pick the right time to scaffold away. We've yet to get good at that yet, though. Next slide. This slide really speaks to the creating a network of schools. And when we put on our lens about creating a network of schools, we're really applying the best characteristics, the best strategies of what a high quality and well-functioning school district does, okay? And that's really us building these systems, okay? That looks like routine communication with all of our program providers. Every month, we have a meeting with all of the principals and program leaders in the facilities to share out our common information, updates, problems of practice, seeing how we could support each other. Next thing is really focusing on quality instruction. That's why we're here, okay? Learning walks is one example of how we really take where the professional development is of the principal, how they're applying the professional development, how the teachers are implementing it with fidelity, or if they need more help, we give them recommendations. The learning walks is a multi-step process. It's essentially a professional development assessment in and of itself. What we do is after we make these observations, go into classrooms, talk to teachers, meet with administrators. We give them recommendations as to how they might want to move forward to further improve the quality of instruction. This has been a great exercise. We've been able to do these exercises. We did 3 last year. We've done 2 already this year. And what's great about it is that the feedback we give the administrators, they give the teachers in a very quick turnaround. Teachers always want real quick turnaround and feedback, and the learning walks enable us to do that. It gives them very good direction. Also, it trust builds. We're working with facilities that have not worked. We were not around 5 years ago. So us having the ability to say what we're going to do, provide very clear feedback, and then also make ourselves available for follow-up conversations really helps build that trust. One thing that's been really great, and that's why I love that Dr. Worthy used a star graphic there, is the professional collaboration happening. And when we got the STAR assessment launched, many of the facilities didn't use it. And instead of me talking about the STAR assessment, we thought it best that another program that does use it speak to its relevance and its ability. So having the Bridgeport Junior Detention Center teachers go up to Litchfield at CJR and having the staff at CJR talk about how they use it was a very authentic way for those teachers to realize how helpful it could be for them. It's better for them to hear it from practitioners than it is us. It creates a lot more credibility. So having done something like that, that's how professional learning can really work. That sense of collaboration strengthens the network, adds credibility to it. Now Bridgeport uses a STAR assessment, and they're using it to guide their instruction like Dr. Worthy said. Lastly, we've really benefited from building partnerships with CSSD and DOC the past year. Tina and myself have standing meetings with clinicians, with CPOs, with JDOs, with a bunch of other acronyms I can't think of right now, within the facilities that help us share information more authentically. So gone is the idea that it's separate. We're able to work with these other professionals and really have a very thorough sense of wraparound for the student. That's been helpful. Last slide from me. Okay. So one other way of network building, more from the statewide perspective, is in the summertime, we got to work with John Frassinelli at the state, and we got to meet with all of the state district liaisons across the state. So every school district that has 5,000 students or more has one person that specializes in district reentry. Having them on a statewide Teams meeting where Ms. Mitchell and I got to talk about all the supports we're providing was a great way for them to hear the same common message. Them hearing that, and then what Tina said, where some districts had real concerns about how they were getting notified of students returning, it gave us the feedback that we knew what we had to work on. So having that statewide meeting, the first of its kind last August, and then we're going to be having another one this spring, and then having another one in the summertime, was a great way for everybody to hear the same language, and having the backing of the state was essential. This past fall, Ms. Mitchell and I, we took our PSSs on the road. We spent 6 weeks going to all the different juvenile probation officers across the state. We know that when we re-enter a student back into the schools, it's possible that they might get disengaged. We understand that. We don't accept it, but we understand it. We also know that they have to be compliant with their juvenile probation officer. So we almost see it as a parent share. We say, listen, if the student is disengaged in school, we're going to be calling that student's JPO. And when the student goes to their probation officer, they're going to see our PSS too. So building those partnerships with the juvenile probation officers has been a way to really say, you might fall behind in school, but they're still going to come and find you and try to re-engage you back into their education. The probation officers have been very happy that we've been there because we're taking something off their plate. We're saying, we'll help you navigate the school piece. You make sure the student's on the straight and narrow, we'll take care of the school piece. That's been a great partnership. Lastly, working with agencies like Project Longevity, CTVIP, other street-based organizations, it's really made our web so much broader. And we're just looking forward to continuing building those partnerships to help meet the needs of our students.
So we're at the recommendation part of our presentation. So moving forward, we're going to provide some barriers and some recommendations that we have to address the barriers. The first one, you saw in the prior slides of how low the STAR data assessments are, how low our students are performing. And in order to increase or improve the student growth, some of the recommendations that we have are extend the school day, which would allow for more instructional time for math and reading intervention. The second one, explore the possibility of obtaining specialized staff. And this is to ensure that they are specialized in reading and specialized in math to provide that intervention. Also to look at the schedule to look for creative ways to incorporate an intervention block in the schedule that's currently standing. The last recommendation for this, in order to target the population that is in need of intervention, there needs to be a very focused process, and this is RTI, which is the response to intervention process, which uses scientifically based instructional strategies to address the needs of the students. We would do this through professional learning communities, as Mr. Tarker referenced earlier, is where teachers come together and they use their expertise to provide professional development to each other.
So that first set of recommendations, those are strategies that school districts employ for continuous improvement. Those are things that school districts do to improve the reading and math level. And Dr. Worthy is going to talk about how we're prepared to lead that conversation.
The second barrier is the students enter the facility that are overage and undercredited. This is something that comes up a lot in our work in the JJ population. So how can we get students to earn more credits? Uniform credit recovery program across all facilities. The virtual academy is free to the JJ population. And it would help the facilities not take on one more thing. The virtual academy actually will take on the brunt of that responsibility to be able to help the facilities. Possible recommendation number 2 would be after school programming. If we have logistical ways to implement an after school program, it would help to provide that logistical part of the credit recovery and the credit attainment, because it can't happen during regular school day. The last one is a credit recovery program in the summer, like an extended school year. Right now, most of the facilities are doing enrichment. They enjoy enrichment, but I'm sure they would probably prefer to earn more credits to get them to their end goal, right? And so if we had that ability to provide an extended school year in the summer to give them that option to have more credit recovery, I think they would benefit from that. The last one is regular consistent collaboration with districts in the state regarding reentry. So as Mr. Tarka mentioned earlier, our partners at SDE has created a list of reentry liaisons that we do reference and we update frequently. As you know, there's turnaround in the education world, so we constantly try to make sure we're up to date on who's taking that position. We want to continue to collaborate, as Mr. Tarka referenced earlier, with those reentry liaisons and continue to provide professional development and just communication and make sure that they continue to understand our work and our role and what ways we can support them. We like to have their feedback, as we said earlier. I think it's important so we know where they are and they understand where we are, and maybe together we can resolve some of the issues or miscommunication if they're not getting, like, the reentry is a big one that they, as I said before. Lastly, it would be to expand that effort to the smaller districts, because we do have students that are in smaller districts. We have kids that are in Northford. We have kids that are in Bethel. And so reaching out to those districts, sometimes we have to kind of do a little researching to figure out who we need to talk to because it's so small. So we want to be able to expand and be able to notify them of our work and be able to collaborate with them more frequently. And so it'll be a smooth transition for those students as well.
So that concludes our presentation. Bring on the questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to your team and the whole presentation. This is fantastic. Before we open it up, I just want a quick question. I guess your team is sort of the overseer of the students coming from one system to another. Is that what I'm getting in this? Okay. Who are the educators?
I'm trying to understand your question.
Who are the, so your team oversees the process of the kids?
Are you talking about the facilities, the schools within inside?
Yeah. Oh, so the educators are the facilities.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I was trying to understand in that. And the reentry liaisons, something that I've heard are not always as strong as they could be. Do you feel that that needs to be addressed a little bit stronger in working with the kids?
I don't think so. She's talking about the liaison for the districts. She's asking if that should be strengthened. I don't think so. I mean, I think the last meeting that we had, right, was a very successful meeting.
I wouldn't say it was strengthened as much as it's people are leaning in. It's a work in progress.
Okay.
When we met in the summertime,
Mhm.
it was very well received.
Okay.
There were some very clear asks about, can you please be more proactive about when a student's returning, because it hurts our attendance and accountability. But I think by and large, the districts have been very receptive to what we're doing. Tina spoke about this. There's a lot of turnover. We've found ourselves, and this is not pointing fingers, but we found ourselves explaining to some district reentry coordinators what their job actually is. And that's okay. That's no blame problem solving. We're there to remind them of what they might need to do. So that's been a good way for us to establish credibility too. We've not had situations where school districts have tried to turn our back on us, Ms. Walker. No.
No, I wasn't saying turn your back. I was just asking strengthening.
I think the only issue is probably those smaller districts that we just talked about.
Yes.
Other than that, I think we're fine.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Gwen.
I want to go back to racial equity impact assessments, right? So this would be I know we had a law, because I am concerned with the programming, like when CCSD, I'm using them as an example, core support services, like when they're submitting grants out there to provide some of these services and to making sure that we have the most culturally responsive agency to meet the diverse needs. It doesn't mean an agency from a certain group is not a good agency, but probably for the community they serve. So are we going to be like overseeing some of these grants? Because they clearly need supports, right? So whether it's after school programs, whether it's relationship building, those liaisons, I mean, those probably could be some jobs in our communities, I'm thinking, right, with reentry. But we want to make sure that whoever we're giving those grants to, they know how to work with the populace that you're going to give the grant to. Because so are we going to be overseeing some of these grants, or can we? Maybe that's to be the question.
Okay, first I got to figure out what agency you're talking about because
I'm just using CCSD as an example because they're on there.
CCSD.
The court supports CSSD,
Okay,
court support
because there's
services. What was I saying?
CSDE too, and I was getting kind of
Oh,
confused.
yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Right, because they do give out grants and I'm
Yes, they do.
noticing they're everywhere in this presentation, just like we know for reentry, for transitional housing.
That's
So-
because CSSD is now responsible for the juvenile justice population. That's the reason why they are the ones that you're seeing. They are the ones that work with the kids once they've been brought into the system. So that's why you see CSSD. There was DCF and now it's CSSD, and DCF provides the services up to the point where they're actually charged with an issue.
Right, so can we make sure that CSS, because there are some concerns, because I have concerns about grants that they've had submitted in other areas. Giving grants to individuals that can't meet the needs of like New Haven, Bridgeport, Hartford. So all I'm asking this body to do is, since they now have that charge, and because the majority of, I just asked them about Manson, the majority of those population is of color, Black and brown.
Correct.
So we want to make sure that the supportive services can actually meet that population when you start to re-enter, because I'm noticing there's a disconnect of who we're giving grant money to and maybe their ability to serve Black
Well,
and brown children.
As we talk about the programs, we do that in JJPOC, and they come before us and we talk about, ask them questions about how are they doing, what are the things they're doing, and things like who are they serving, and we also meet the staffing that does it. So those are the times where we have the opportunity to make those connections and find out. So, and CSSD has been doing it for 3 years.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've had the DCF transfer for approximately 6 years
6
now.
years. Okay, so they're still building the system.
We are, and just to be responsive to your question, we grant our contracts through a competitive bidding process, right? So we put it out to bid, and there's a state process that we go to grant contracts to providers. But just to your point, the latest contract we did through this body is Credible Messengers, right? That we're doing a lot of work with, and the individuals that are working in the Credible Messengers programs come from, we have them in Hartford, Bridgeport, Waterbury right now. They come from Hartford, Bridgeport, and Waterbury, so they are from the community. But I'd be glad to talk to you offline about anything that you'd like to talk about, and we'll see if we can address any of your concerns.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Dr. Worthy.
Yes, ma'am.
I saw your mic. I thought maybe you were
No,
going to say something.
sorry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Representative Porter, then Representative Noah.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that presentation. Excellent, both presentations. I just want to go back to the virtual academy and talk about that, because we're talking about kids that are challenged, deeply challenged. And I'm just wondering what the outcomes are when we talk about virtual learning as opposed to one-on-one, face-to-face, like that socialization that comes with that.
Yeah, I have to agree that virtual academy is not for all kids. And we need to figure out another way of providing credit recovery for those kids who we know can't access virtual academy
Yeah.
because our kids are so low.
I just want to add that most of the credit, I think all of the credit recovery programs are virtual. The difference with one of the things, like Dr. Worthy said, is we've been trying to explore other options that maybe the district can provide other ways a student can obtain credit other than through a virtual world. Virtual Academy does have a teacher that goes to the facility and checks on the kids weekly. So it's a live person, a teacher who will go in and reinforce. So he would pull the reports and see where they're struggling and then try to reteach that material to them. So there is that live part to it that they can provide, but unfortunately, most of the credit recovery programs are virtual, but we are trying to explore other options.
Go ahead.
And what they said, we totally agree that it can't be the main course. It is only a small supplement. But what the virtual academy teacher Tina spoke about is he looks at the students' transcripts and says, you struggled with math. It's best you don't do virtual academy math. You seem to do pretty well in social studies. You might be able to do social studies okay on your own. So there's a real strategy and a real intentionality with what classes they take with virtual academy, because we know it is not a substitute for face-to-face instruction.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think the last thing, Madam Chair, is that I would just really like to see data supporting what these outcomes are.
Yep.
And I mean, across the spectrum for Virtual Academy with all the students that have access and partake. I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And just to say, I mean, as we talked about CSSD just starting, this group is just starting too. So we're going in the right direction. I know it's not quick enough, but we are going in the right direction. We are identifying the problems and now we're coming up with solutions. So I think that's a great segue the way we handled it today, because we are seeing the problems that we still need to do. Now we're starting to see some of the actual process of what we're doing to address it. Representative Nolan.
I actually had a concern in regards to the virtual learning also. But earlier in your slides, and I just want to make sure that it's not the same thing, or if it is, to try and understand, you said there was a struggle with technology. Is that the virtual learning, or do we have a technology issue that we have to address?
That happened over the summer. Those have been resolved, but there was some Wi-Fi issues, accessing, the computer sometimes has to get re-imaged. There's a lot of that kind of stuff, but they've since been resolved. So when we were doing this, we were still in the process of getting them, and that's why it was slow start. That was just to say that there was a slow start in getting credit recovery started. Okay.
And I'm totally in agreement with the virtual learning is not something that should be just on a regular basis for kids. I think that live person is necessary. So maybe one of those changes that could be made is to increase the amount of times that people go in person. And if you would share with us maybe, what you would need for us to make that happen.
I just want to make sure we're clear though. The actual instruction, core instruction is in person. We're talking about when they try to recover credits. That's the virtual academy we're talking about. And that happens after school, or a time that kids can do a free time they have to do credit recovery. So I want to make sure we understand that.
Yeah, but it seems like there's a struggle with.
Oh, definitely a major struggle. Like I said, if you're so far behind, you can't access virtual academy, no matter who's with you. Right. So we need to figure out another way to provide credit recovery for those kids.
Okay.
There are a lot of questions and comments. I'm going to have to do a couple of quick comments, and I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair because I got to go chair education upstairs now. So first of all, I want to thank everybody that did a presentation today. It really makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. Dr. Worthy used to say to me all the time, because he was my boss, I'd say, how are you doing? He'd say, struggling. Well, we're struggling, but we're struggling in the right way. We're looking at the problems, identifying them, and addressing them, and saying these are things that are real in Connecticut. And so let's talk about them as opposed to ignoring them. So with everybody's presentation today, it's amazing. The sad thing that I learned today was that we had accounted for about $181 million for special education. We are at a peak of about $60 million more, and it's only February for costs for what the state is spending for special education. And I raise that because we have this idea that everything is fine and we keep pushing things under the rug. And I heard you, Gwen, we hear you, but I want people to get angry too and say, we got to make a change, because this is not going to continue in this place anymore. Take the facts, deal with the facts, and drive the issues, please. Have a great day. And I'm struggling too, Rev. Dr. Worthy, go right ahead.
I think I have a hand over, a
That's-
couple hands down here. So.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Simone. I actually work with this team of three here. I work for ACEs, and we actually have three regions programs that are not in Manson or the detention centers. Going back to the question that you had about how kids do struggle with the online learning. What we've been able to do in our Hamden regions, as well as one of our Hartford programs up in at Hartford Regions program, is that we do a lot with like work readiness. So we've been able to, in conjunction with the school districts, give credit for work readiness. We've also there's capstone projects that are set up for most of the school districts. So we work in conjunction again with the school districts in creating very unique student-focused capstone projects where it doesn't have to be on the computer. It can be written, it could be presentations, where we've had school districts come in and actually watch the kids do their capstone, which is a graduation requirement. So we've really figured out ways of working around the online format for some students who just really, really struggle, especially when you're trying to do independent work with them, where, you know, the school day ends and they have to do this work on their own or with the support of residential team members. So we are definitely figuring out ways of working around, but also using the online format for kids that find it actually in some ways easier. We will incorporate that into some of their schoolwork as well. So I just wanted to share that.
Dr. Gordon?
Yeah, I just had two comments, and one of the things that I think carries over, Dr. Gordon from the Constitution Center at Yale. Two issues that I think carry over with both presentations. One is the idea of earning more credit, and what I guess I was struggling with was having the credit doesn't mean that you have the skills. And so I want us to make sure that we are tending to this issue of the skills building of the students so that when we send them out into the world, they actually are reading at, where they should be reading so they can fulfill the jobs that we want them to fulfill. That's issue one. But across both of them also was this issue of prevention. I feel as if we have really good data from both presentations kind of highlighting where there are gaps. So you talked about K through third grade kids who were being suspended and expelled. The question that was there for me is, what do those kids look like when they're 15, 16, 17? And what can we do now to actually intervene and address those issues? And I think that we have a great opportunity to kind of begin to benchmark and figure out what strategies we need to be putting in place to address the issues and the needs of those individuals that are there. And then the other piece that's there, kind of going back to DCF's presentation, is just thinking about what does that then mean for the young people that are there. So if they're coming in at a third grade level, there's a question in my head, is our goal to get them credits, or is our goal to get them up to a level of kind of literacy that is useful for them and their functioning? And so this is me kind of thinking out loud, is there a place for us to just, and I hate to say it this way, throw with it the shit around, credit earning, but think about, can we get folks to competency in the basic elements and that be their benchmark versus worrying about credits? And that's just a question that's in my head that I don't have an answer to, but I know it's something that given this presentation, I've been thinking about role of prevention, issue one, and kind of, do we need to change the rubric that we're using to measure success for these population? And I'll just stop there.
Dr. Gordon, thank you. I mean, I think we're stuck, right? Because, kids need credits in order to graduate, and at the same time, how we build up those skills. So we're trying to figure that piece out.
Thank you, Ms. Reese. Good afternoon, Deputy Commissioner Charles Hughes for SDE. The question that I have is kind of more of a data-based one. You had shared a chart that identified all the number of students and then identified that 72% of those students are special ed. Sounds like a lot of the bridge of your foundational services are based upon those pupil service support staff that are, re-engaging kids, high touch point frequency, work with districts. What about the other 28% of the students who are not identified as special ed? Are they also receiving the benefit of those pupil service individuals?
They are. They are.
Great.
They are receiving that. It's just that the special ed students will follow a different process with the PPT, with that. So it's just that to answer your question plainly, those students are still getting the same level of supports.
Excellent.
Yes.
Two quick things. One, going back to your slides on the reading and math scores. Boy, I mean, those are really staggering. I mean, assessments. And I paused on them just to throw out a question that maybe we can talk about. I don't know that you can answer it now, but as part of our historical reviews, we've gathered some of that before your shop was set up. We would gather some of that reading and math assessment from USD1 based on actually pulled up one of our older reports based on the TABE. Okay, so you're gonna be more familiar. I don't remember what a test for adult basic education. In our last report, it said that of 109 15 to 17-year-olds that took that in the period of time, more than 100 were assessed at intake to be on the M level of the TABE, capable of grade 4 to 5.9 academic content, which is still very low, but your assessments put your kids even lower than that because you had the majority of kids you assessed in the 1st to 3rd grade level, not the 4th to 6th grade level. So I noted that. I mean, that's a really low, right? And so I just wanted to raise, I mean, it is, maybe that's something we can look at, like, is there a decline even in the last couple of years in terms of the reading level that kids are coming in with? I noticed that in your thing. I don't know if you had a comment on that.
I don't have a comment as much as I have a quick anecdote. We get students who enter enter the facilities, and our pupil service specialists will reach out to the district and try to get transcripts for a 15-year-old student. On more than one occasion, those districts have said, that student's never attended high school. That student stopped attending in 7th grade, right? So what Dr. Gordon talks about, what happened before, right? They're lost. And I say that to validate what you're saying, to validate our work, that they're coming at that level because many of them have been disengaged long time before they got to the facilities. So what do we do while they're there? We go back to some of the recommendations that we're looking to really start.
Yeah. Yeah, we can chat offline too about the, the assessments, what's being used now, I mean, is there a trend down in that? I mean, I think it would be important to know, I should say, if there's actually a trend down in the reading and math levels over the last couple of years of kids coming in.
Yeah.
And just the last point, and I think I've made it with some of you before, I think the work that you're describing and the reliance on engagement and relationships, and the anecdote you shared was really powerful about the kids. Don't leave me, right? Stick with me. I mean, is really important. I think that work you're doing is really, really important. But I do want to come back to the issue of oversight and the issue of the 79% of students, if I got that right, 72, 79%, right? It's probably a lot closer to 100%. I had my guess, but who are eligible for special education and related services in the facilities, and the need for, I think, structural clarification. So I'm just sort of flagging this for more discussion about the role of your unit versus the role of SDE's special education division in terms of their concurrent responsibility under federal law for oversight and monitoring of special education service delivery for students served by the USD1 or the local school districts, right? And what that interplay is within the context of the JPOC statute. So, and just trying to sort that out through either memorandum of agreement or statutory modification. So just thought that was important to make that record.